I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me 24 years ago, right here in St. Catharines, Pennsylvania. And I'm warning you, this story is going to make you angry. It's going to make you sad. But I need to tell it, because maybe it'll save some kid out there. In the year 2000, I came home early from work. I walked up the stairs of my house. I opened the door to my 15-year-old daughter's bedroom, and what I saw changed my life forever. Father Michael O'Brien, the priest from St. Catherine's Catholic Church, the man our whole town respected, the man I trusted with my daughter, was on top of her. In her bed, doing things I can't even say without feeling sick. My baby girl was crying, eyes squeezed shut, her body frozen. And he didn't even hear me come in. He was too busy destroying my child. I didn't think. I didn't reason. I walked back down those stairs, into my kitchen, opened the drawer, and grabbed my meat knife, the big one I used for cutting roasts. And I went back up. What did I do with that knife in my hand? Well, that's what I'm going to tell you today. The whole story, from the beginning. How that man got into my house. How he destroyed my daughter for 3 years right under my nose. And how I, a daily Mass Catholic who trusted the church with my life, discovered that the devil doesn't always wear horns. Sometimes he wears a collar. My name is Diane Murphy. I've lived in St. Catharines my whole life. It's one of those small Pennsylvania towns where everybody knows everybody, where you go to the same church your parents went to and their parents before them, where faith is as much a part of daily life as breathing. I was raised Catholic, married Catholic, raised my daughter Catholic. My late husband Sean and I were at Mass every Sunday without fail. After he died, I went every day. It was my anchor in a world that had suddenly lost its center. Rachel was our only child. She was 10 when Sean died of a heart attack in the mine. He was only 42. One day he kissed me goodbye in the morning, and by noon I was a widow. Rachel was a daddy's girl, and losing him broke something in her that I couldn't seem to fix, no matter how hard I tried. Those first few years after Sean died were the hardest. The widow's pension wasn't enough to live on, so I took 2 jobs. Cafeteria worker at the county hospital during the day, office cleaning crew in the evenings. I'd leave the house at 5:30 in the morning and wouldn't get home until after 11 most nights. Rachel stayed with neighbors after school until I could pick her up. The guilt ate at me every day. My daughter needed me, and I wasn't there. But what choice did I have? We needed to eat. We needed a roof over our heads. And in my mind, the church would fill the gap. St. Catherine's was our second home, our extended family. If I couldn't be there for Rachel all the time, at least God would watch over her through his church and his priests. When Father Michael O'Brien arrived at St. Catherine's in 1996, everyone loved him immediately. He was younger than our previous priest, mid-30s, with that Irish charm and a way of making the gospel relevant to everyday life. He played guitar at the youth mass. He coached CYO basketball. He visited the sick and elderly. He seemed like a gift from God to our parish. Rachel was 12 in 1997, preparing for her confirmation. She was still struggling with her father's death, quieter than before, prone to bouts of sadness. I worried about her constantly, but what could I do? I had to work. I remember that Sunday like it was yesterday. After Mass, Father Mike approached me in the church vestibule. He had that warm smile, that gentle voice that made you feel like you were the only person who mattered. "Mrs. Murphy," he said, "I've noticed Rachel is very bright. She has a real depth of faith for someone so young." My heart swelled with pride. Father Mike had noticed my daughter, singled her out as special. "I'd like to offer her private catechism lessons," he continued, "to prepare her more deeply for confirmation. I think she has the potential to be a youth group leader someday." I was honored, overwhelmed with gratitude. "I can come to your house Thursday afternoons," he offered. "No charge, of course. It's my pastoral duty. I know you work long hours, and this way Rachel won't have to find transportation." It seemed like providence, a blessing, a sign that God was looking out for us after all. That would be wonderful, Father, I said. Rachel would love that. And Rachel was excited too. Father Mike is so cool, Mom, she said. Not like the old priests. He actually listens when kids talk. So it began. Every Thursday at 3 p.m., Father Mike would come to our house. Rachel would be home from school by then. I'd still be at work until 6, and wouldn't get home until around 6:15 or 6:30. By then, Father Mike would be gone, but he'd always leave a note. Rachel did great today, God bless. Rachel would tell me about the lessons, Bible stories, lives of saints, prayers they practiced. Father Mike brought religious books, workbooks, materials for her confirmation preparation. Everything seemed perfect. I thanked God every night for sending this holy man to guide my daughter. I never questioned why the lessons always took place in Rachel's bedroom with the door closed. I never wondered why Father Mike insisted they needed privacy for their spiritual discussions. I never thought to ask Rachel why she started keeping her bedroom door locked at other times, something she'd never done before. I trusted him completely. He was a priest. In our Catholic community, questioning a priest was unthinkable. Father knew best, always. I'm a different person now, wiser, angrier, more watchful. I know that evil doesn't announce itself with horns and a tail. It comes with a smile, with kindness, with your trust freely given. This is the story of how that trust was betrayed in the worst possible way. The story of what I found when I walked into my daughter's bedroom that June afternoon in 2000. And what I did about it. Because there are still children out there being hurt. There are still predators hiding behind collars and crosses. There are still parents who trust blindly, as I once did. Maybe by telling this story, I can save one child from what happened to Rachel. Maybe I can help one parent see what I was blind to. Maybe I can give one survivor the courage to speak up. That's why I'm finally telling everything. For Rachel, for all the children who couldn't be saved, and for the ones who still can be. In 1995, my life looked completely different. I was Diane Murphy, 39 years old, working-class Irish Catholic wife and mother. Sean and I had been married for 17 years by then, high school sweethearts who tied the knot the summer after graduation. We had our Rachel 2 years later. One child was all we could manage on Sean's coal miner wages, but she was enough. Our perfect, precious gift. We weren't rich by any stretch, but we got by. Sean worked in one of the last operating coal mines in western Pennsylvania. The industry was dying even then, but he was lucky to have steady employment when many of his friends had lost their jobs as mines closed down. We lived in a modest, 2-story home on Maple Street. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. We'd saved for years for the down payment, pinching pennies until they screamed. Our life revolved around 2 things, family and faith. Sunday Mass at St. Catherine's was non-negotiable. Rachel went to CCD classes on Saturday mornings. I sang in the church choir. Sean was a Knight of Columbus. The parish was our second home, our community, our foundation. Then came October 3rd, 1995. A day that's burned into my memory. I was at home, folding laundry, when the phone rang. The mine superintendent's voice was grave. Mrs. Murphy, there's been an accident. Sean had collapsed underground. Heart attack. By the time they got him to the surface, it was too late. At 42 years old, my husband was gone. Just like that. Rachel was only 10. Daddy's little girl. She'd wait by the window every evening for him to come home, running to the door the moment she spotted him walking up the street, still in his work clothes, with coal dust on his face. The day we buried him, she kept looking toward the church doors, as if expecting him to walk in and tell us it was all a mistake. The funeral was a blur. The whole parish turned out. Father Donovan spoke about Sean's devotion to family and faith. Rachel wouldn't let go of the small gold cross Sean always wore around his neck. I put it on her that day, and she never took it off. The following months were the darkest of my life. Grief crushed me like a physical weight. I couldn't sleep, could barely eat. Rachel started having nightmares, waking up crying for her daddy. We were both drowning. The practical realities hit hard, too. Sean's widow's pension wasn't nearly enough to cover our expenses. The mortgage still needed paying. Rachel needed clothes, school supplies, food on the table. I had no choice but to find work, and fast. With only a high school diploma and no real job experience, my options were limited. I took what I could get: a position as a cafeteria worker at the county hospital during the day, and evenings on a cleaning crew for office buildings downtown. Between the two jobs, I worked from 6 a.m. until 11 p.m. most days. It was exhausting, soul-crushing work, but it kept a roof over our heads and food on the table. But it meant leaving Rachel alone far more than I wanted to. I arranged for her to stay with neighbors after school until I could pick her up between jobs. Mrs. Kowaleski next door would check in on her in the evenings. On weekends, I'd take extra shifts when I could get them, leaving Rachel with my sister or friends from church. The guilt was constant, gnawing at me. My daughter had just lost her father, and now her mother was barely present too. I'd come home late at night to find her already asleep, sometimes with tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. I'd sit by her bed, stroking her hair, promising things would get better, even when I wasn't sure they would. In those dark days, faith became my only lifeline. I clung to it with desperate intensity. I went to early morning mass at 6 a.m. whenever I could, before my hospital shift started. I prayed the rosary every night, no matter how exhausted I was. I kept a small picture of the Sacred Heart in my work locker, touching it whenever I passed by, silently asking for strength. Rachel found comfort in faith too. She became an altar server, taking her duties with utmost seriousness. She attended her CCD classes faithfully, preparing for the sacraments with genuine devotion. The church became our sanctuary, our support, our extended family. By 1997, we'd established a new normal. It wasn't perfect, but we were managing. Rachel was 12 now, preparing for her confirmation. I was still working both jobs, still exhausted most of the time, but we'd adapted. The raw wound of Sean's death had scabbed over, still tender, still painful, but no longer bleeding us dry. That's when Father Michael O'Brien came to St. Catherine's. Father Donovan, who'd been at our parish for nearly 20 years, retired due to health issues. His replacement arrived in late 1996, Father Mike, as he asked everyone to call him. He was 37, much younger than Father Donovan, with sandy brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and an easy smile. He spoke with a slight Boston accent and had an informal, approachable manner that was a stark contrast to Father Donovan's old-school formality. The parish took to him immediately. The teenagers especially loved him. He played guitar at youth mass, coached the CYO basketball team, organized pizza parties and movie nights. He made religion seem relevant, even cool. Parents appreciated his energy and his apparent genuine interest in their children's spiritual development. Rachel thought he was awesome. She'd come home from youth group excited about Father Mike's modern take on Bible stories or the way he related saints' lives to contemporary issues. He was exactly what our parish needed: a breath of fresh air, a shot of vitality into our traditional community. It was after Sunday Mass in May 1997 that Father Mike approached me in the vestibule. Rachel was at my side, fidgeting as I chatted with Mrs. Lombardozzi about the upcoming parish bazaar. "Mrs. Murphy," Father Mike said, extending his hand, "could I have a word?" We stepped aside, and he got right to the point. "I've been noticing Rachel during her CCD classes," he said, smiling down at my daughter, who beamed with pride. "She has a remarkable spiritual depth for someone her age. Very insightful questions, very thoughtful responses." My heart swelled. After all the challenges, all the absences, all the times I'd worried I was failing her, here was affirmation that my daughter was thriving, at least spiritually. "I'd like to offer her private catechism lessons," he continued, "to prepare her more deeply for confirmation. I think she has potential to be a youth group leader someday." Rachel's eyes widened with excitement. "That's very generous, Father, but I couldn't ask you to—" I began. It's no trouble at all, he insisted. I can come to your house on Thursday afternoons. No charge, of course. It's my pastoral duty. I know you work long hours, Mrs. Murphy. This way, Rachel won't have to find transportation. It seemed like a miracle, a direct answer to my prayers. A respected spiritual leader, taking personal interest in my daughter's faith formation, filling the gap that my constant absence had created. It was more than I could have hoped for. That would be wonderful, Father, I said. We'd be honored. Awesome, Rachel exclaimed, immediately blushing at her outburst in church. Father Mike just laughed. Awesome indeed, he agreed, giving her a conspiratorial wink. The lessons began the following Thursday. Every week, Father Mike would come to our house at 3 p.m., shortly after Rachel got home from school. I'd still be at work, not finishing my hospital shift until 6 p.m. By the time I got home around 6:15 or 6:30, Father Mike would be gone, but he'd always leave a note on the kitchen table. Rachel did great today. God bless Father Mike. Rachel would tell me about their lessons, Bible stories they'd discussed, saints they'd studied, prayers they'd practiced. Father Mike brought religious books, worksheets, materials for her confirmation preparation. Sometimes they'd watch short videos about Catholic teachings. It all sounded wonderful, exactly what a dedicated priest should be doing for a parishioner. I thanked God every night for sending this holy man to guide my daughter, to provide the spiritual mentorship I was too busy, too exhausted to give her myself. In my mind, these lessons were a blessing, a sign of divine providence. Never once did I question why the lessons always took place in Rachel's bedroom with the door closed. Never once did I wonder why a grown man needed privacy with my 12-year-old daughter for spiritual discussions. Never once did I think to ask Rachel why she seemed increasingly quiet after these sessions, or why she had started keeping her bedroom door locked at other times. I trusted him completely. He was a priest. In our community, priests were beyond reproach, above suspicion. Father knew best, always. This was the late 1990s, before the Boston Globe Spotlight team broke the story of widespread abuse in the Catholic Church, before words like grooming and predator priest entered our vocabulary. Back when questioning a priest's motives was unthinkable, when blind trust in clergy was the norm. Back when I still believed the devil always looked like a devil, not like a smiling young priest with a guitar and my daughter's complete trust. By September 1997, 4 months into the weekly catechism lessons, I started noticing subtle changes in Rachel. Nothing dramatic at first, just small shifts in her behavior that I initially brushed off as normal adolescent development or lingering grief from losing her father. She became quieter than usual, more withdrawn. The animated excitement she'd initially shown about Thursdays with Father Mike gradually diminished. When I'd ask about her lessons, her answers grew shorter, less detailed. "How's catechism going?" I'd ask while preparing dinner after work. "Fine, Mom," she'd reply, eyes focused on her plate, not on me. I chalked it up to typical pre-teen behavior. 12-year-olds aren't known for extensive conversations with their parents, or perhaps she was entering that phase where faith becomes more private, more personal. I remembered going through something similar at her age. By the end of 1997, the changes became more noticeable. Rachel lost weight, not dramatically, but enough that her clothes hung looser on her small frame. I told myself it was just a growth spurt, that gangly phase before adolescence when kids shoot up and thin out. Then the nightmares started. I'd wake to hear her crying out in her sleep, sometimes screaming. The first time it happened, I rushed to her room in panic, finding her tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, her face contorted in fear. "What did you dream about, sweetheart?" I asked, stroking her hair, my heart racing with concern. "I don't remember, Mom," she'd say, but her eyes told a different story. She remembered. She just couldn't or wouldn't tell me. Her grades started slipping too. Rachel had always been a good student, but now her teacher called to express concern. "Rachel seems different lately," Mrs. Patterson told me. "Distracted. Sometimes she just stares out the window. When I call on her, she jumps like I've startled her." I attributed it all to delayed grief. Some children, I'd read, don't process loss immediately. It can surface months or even years later, triggered by developmental changes or anniversaries. It had been about 2 years since Sean died. Maybe this was simply Rachel finally working through her father's death. In early 1998, when Rachel was 13, she asked to stop the catechism lessons. "Why, honey? Father Mike is so good to you. It's such a special opportunity," I said, genuinely perplexed. I'm tired of it," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't let her stop. How could I? She was getting ready for confirmation, an important sacrament in our faith, and I felt indebted to Father Mike for his generosity, his special attention to my daughter. I mentioned Rachel's request to him after Sunday Mass. His expression shifted to one of deep concern. "Mrs. Murphy, Rachel is going through a difficult phase right now. It's actually quite normal for teenagers to question their faith, to push back against religious instruction." He placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "This is exactly when she needs guidance the most. God doesn't give up on us when we struggle, and neither should we give up on her." I was moved by his dedication, his pastoral wisdom. I thanked him profusely for persisting with Rachel, despite her resistance. What a blessing to have such a committed priest in our lives. Rachel's isolation deepened over the following months. She stopped hanging out with friends, declining invitations for sleepovers she would have jumped at before. She spent more time alone in her room, door locked. A new habit that troubled me, but one I reasoned was just part of growing up, needing privacy. Sometimes at night, I'd pass her door and hear muffled crying. When I'd knock and ask what was wrong, she'd go silent, then call out, "Nothing, Mom." Sunday Mass became a battleground. Rachel, who had once loved church, now invented excuses to avoid attending. "I have a headache, Mom. I don't feel well. I have too much homework." I insisted she go anyway. We were Catholic. Sunday Mass wasn't optional. But I noticed how she stiffened when Father Mike approached us after service, how she angled her body away from him, eyes downcast, responses monosyllabic. By 1999, when Rachel was 14, her behavior had changed drastically. The quiet, withdrawn phase gave way to explosive anger. She'd lash out over the smallest things. A request to set the table could trigger a screaming match. A gentle reminder about homework might earn a slammed door. Her appearance changed, too. She'd always had long hair that she wore in braids or ponytails, but she came home one day with it chopped brutally short, almost a buzz cut. Her clothes shifted from the colorful outfits she'd loved to shapeless, dark garments that concealed her body completely. Baggy sweatshirts, oversized jeans, layers upon layers, even in warm weather. Physical affection, once natural between us, became impossible. If I tried to hug her, she'd flinch and pull away. A kiss on the forehead before bed was met with a sharp turn of her head. It was as if she couldn't bear to be touched. I tried taking her to a therapist. Mrs. Chen, our neighbor, who worked as a school counselor, recommended someone who specialized in adolescent issues. Rachel refused to go. "I'm not crazy," she screamed when I suggested it. "Just leave me alone." Thursdays, catechism days, became particularly difficult. Rachel would invent increasingly elaborate excuses. "Mom, I don't want a lesson today. I'm sick. I have a test tomorrow. I need to study. My stomach hurts really bad." I would call Father Mike, unsure what to do. "Don't worry, Mrs. Murphy," he'd always say. "I'll take care of her. These phases are normal. The important thing is consistency." So he would come, and Rachel would reluctantly go upstairs with him, door closing behind them. I'd head back to work, grateful that such a trusted figure was helping guide my troubled daughter. Sometimes when I came home, I'd find Rachel's eyes red and swollen from crying. When I asked what was wrong, she'd just shake her head. "Nothing, Mom. Leave me alone." Rachel's confirmation took place in May 1999. It should have been a joyful, meaningful day, the culmination of years of religious education, a significant milestone in her Catholic life. Instead, she went through the ceremony like a sleepwalker, mechanically reciting the responses, her face a blank mask. At the reception afterward, she refused to take photos with Father Mike, although he was the one who had prepared her for this sacrament. She wouldn't even look at him. "Rachel, you've waited so long for this day," I said, confused by her attitude. "Aren't you happy?" "Whatever," she muttered, and walked away. That night, I heard her sobbing in her room. I knocked, tried the door, but it was locked. "Rachel, open up. What's happening? Talk to me." The only response was continued crying, muffled now, as if she'd buried her face in a pillow to silence herself. I stood outside her door for what felt like hours, my heart breaking, completely at a loss. Finally, exhausted from a long day and from the emotional strain of not understanding what was happening with my daughter, I gave up and went to bed. I had assumed that after confirmation, the private lessons with Father Mike would naturally conclude. Their purpose had been fulfilled, but when I mentioned this to him, he seemed concerned. "Rachel needs continued spiritual guidance now more than ever," he insisted. "She's in a faith crisis, and I need to help her through it. This is exactly when young people can drift away from the church if they don't have proper support." Again, I was touched by his commitment. What priest would dedicate so much personal time to one struggling teenager? It seemed like a blessing, a divine intervention in our difficult lives. The lessons continued. Looking back now, with the terrible knowledge I have, the warning signs were so obvious. The self-harm scars on her arms that I glimpsed only once, when her sleeve rode up, scars she quickly covered, explaining away as a scratch from our neighbor's cat. The developing anorexia as she ate less and less at dinner, pushing food around her plate to make it look touched. The panic attacks that came seemingly out of nowhere, leaving her gasping for breath, which I attributed to anxiety about school or normal teenage stress. All classic symptoms of sexual abuse, all there, right in front of me, screaming for attention. But I didn't see the pattern, or rather, I didn't allow myself to see it. I attributed each symptom to a different cause: grief, adolescence, academic pressure, hormones. Never connecting the dots to the one common factor in all of it: Thursdays with Father Mike. That was the power of the collar, the power of absolute trust we placed in priests. It created a blindness so profound that a mother could miss her own child's desperate signals for help, even when they were written in neon. It would take something far more explicit, far more undeniable, to finally open my eyes. And on June 15th, 2000, that's exactly what happened. Thursday, June 15th, 2000. A date forever burned into my memory, seared there like a brand. Rachel was 15 by then. I was working my usual day shift at the hospital cafeteria, serving lunch to doctors and nurses, visitors and patients. It was a busy day. Thursdays always were, with the hospital's outpatient clinic running at full capacity. Around 2:30 that afternoon, I started feeling sick. It began with a headache, a tight band of pain across my forehead that gradually intensified until I could barely see straight. Then came the nausea, rising in waves that had me gripping the edge of the serving counter to stay upright. My supervisor noticed. "Diane, you're white as a sheet," she said, taking the serving spoon from my trembling hand. "You need to go home." I tried to protest. We were short-staffed already, and I couldn't afford to lose the hours. But when I nearly dropped a tray of food, she insisted, "Go, now, before you contaminate something or hurt yourself." I clocked out at 3 p.m., 3 hours earlier than usual. As I drove home, the pain in my head pulsed with each heartbeat. All I could think about was getting to my dark, quiet bedroom and lying down with a cold cloth over my eyes. The drive from the hospital to our house usually took about 20 minutes. I remember passing St. Catherine's Church and absently noting Father Mike's silver Honda Accord in the parking lot. Must be at the church office, I thought, the observation floating through my pain-fogged brain without connecting to anything significant. I pulled into our driveway at about 3:50. As I gathered my purse and lunch bag, I glanced up and saw something that gave me pause. Father Mike's car was parked on the street in front of our house. For a moment, confusion cut through the migraine haze. Why was his car here? Then it clicked. Thursday. Catechism Day. Of course, I entered the house quietly, not wanting to disturb Rachel's lesson with unnecessary noise that would only aggravate my throbbing head. The house was silent. Father Mike's jacket hung on the coat rack in the entryway. His briefcase sat on the coffee table, partially open, some papers visible inside. They must be studying upstairs, I thought, heading toward the kitchen for Advil. As I passed the bottom of the stairs, I heard a sound from above. Muffled, indistinct. I stopped, listened. There it was again, a soft sound, like someone in distress, a whimper, a cry. My first thought was that Rachel might be sick. Maybe she'd caught whatever I had. I forgot about the Advil and slowly climbed the stairs, wincing as each step sent fresh pain shooting through my skull. Rachel's bedroom door was closed, as it always was during her Thursday sessions with Father Mike. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard his voice, low and soothing. "Shh, it's okay." Then I heard another sound, the unmistakable creaking of bed springs, rhythmic, steady, and under that the heavy sound of breathing, his, and stifled crying, hers. My heart began to pound so hard I felt it in my fingertips, in my ears, behind my eyes. Something was very wrong. In that moment, my maternal instinct sliced through the pain and confusion, suddenly alert, suddenly terrified. I turned the handle slowly, trying to make no sound. The door wasn't locked, a deviation from Rachel's usual habit. It swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. What I saw in those first seconds will haunt me until my dying day. Rachel's room was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. On her bed lay my daughter, face down, her head turned toward the wall away from the door. Her eyes were squeezed shut, tears streaming silently down her face. One hand clutched her bedsheet in a white-knuckled grip, and on top of her was Father Michael O'Brien. His black cassock was pushed up around his waist, his pants around his ankles. His body moved in a rhythm that matched the creaking of the bed. He didn't see me at first, too focused on what he was doing to my child. For what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 2 or 3 seconds, I stood frozen in the doorway. My brain struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Not Father Mike, not in my house, not to my daughter. But it was real. It was happening. It had been happening for 3 years. In that moment, something inside me transformed. The shock gave way to rage, pure, primal, all-consuming rage that rose from the deepest part of my being. It was like a tsunami, a wildfire, an explosion, unstoppable, uncontainable, obliterating everything in its path. Father Mike must have sensed something, because he suddenly turned his head and saw me standing there. His face registered immediate panic. He scrambled to get off Rachel, stumbling on his own pants tangled around his ankles. Rachel's eyes flew open at the movement. She saw me. Her expression was a complex mixture of terror, relief, and deep, deep shame. She quickly pulled a blanket over herself, trying to cover her exposed body. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The rage had robbed me of words. I turned and ran down the stairs, my migraine forgotten, adrenaline flooding my system. Behind me, I could hear Father Mike's voice, desperate and pleading. "Mrs. Murphy, wait! This isn't what it looks like!" But I didn't stop. I ran straight to the kitchen, to the drawer where I kept my knives. I grabbed the meat knife, the big one I used for cutting roasts, with an 8-inch blade, recently sharpened. I turned just as Father Mike stumbled into the living room, still trying to pull up his pants, his cassock disheveled, his face a mask of desperation. "Mrs. Murphy, for the love of God!" he cried, seeing the knife in my hand. I didn't respond. I walked toward him, knife raised, my entire being focused on this man who had betrayed every trust, violated every boundary, destroyed my child's innocence. In that moment, I fully intended to kill him. The rage was that complete, that consuming. Father Mike backed away, hands up in a defensive gesture, still pleading, still making excuses. I kept advancing. He retreated until his back hit the front door. He fumbled behind him for the knob, eyes never leaving the knife in my hand. He managed to get the door open and bolted out of my house, barefoot, having forgotten his shoes in his panic. His cassock billowed around him as he ran to his car. He jumped in and sped away, tires screeching on the pavement. I stood in the doorway, knife still clutched in my hand, watching him flee. The rage still pounded through me, but with it now came other emotions: horror at what I'd discovered, gut-wrenching concern for Rachel, confusion about what to do next. I'm not sure how long I stood there, but I was jolted back to reality by Mrs. Chen, our neighbor from across the street. She had seen Father Mike's panicked exit and was hurrying across the lawn toward me. "Diane, what happened? Are you okay?" she called, her face creased with worry. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, shaking, still gripping the knife. Mrs. Chen gently took it from my hand, placing it on the side table in the entryway. "Come sit down," she said softly, leading me to the couch. "Tell me what happened." I managed to whisper, "Rachel. Upstairs. Father Mike." Before my voice failed again. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened in understanding. She'd been a school counselor for 20 years before retiring. She'd seen the signs of abuse before. "I'll check on her," she said, squeezing my hand before heading upstairs. I sat there, my mind reeling. How long had this been happening? How had I not seen it? How could I have let this man into our home, left him alone with my daughter, trusted him so completely? And what would I do now? The knife lay on the side table where Mrs. Chen had placed it. I looked at it, remembering the rage, the absolute certainty I had felt while holding it. I had never been a violent person. I'd never so much as slapped another human being. But in that moment, I had been fully prepared to kill Father Michael O'Brien. And part of me, a part I didn't even know existed until that day, was sorry I hadn't. Mrs. Chen came back downstairs after a few minutes, her face grave. "I need to check on Rachel," I managed to say, standing up on shaky legs. "Give her a moment," Mrs. Chen advised gently. "She's getting dressed. She's in shock." I pushed past her and ran upstairs anyway. My daughter needed me. When I entered her room, Rachel was sitting on the edge of her bed, now fully clothed in sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. She was curled into herself, arms wrapped tightly around her body, rocking slightly back and forth. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, her face pale and drawn. I approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Rachel, baby," I began, reaching out to touch her shoulder. She flinched away from my touch. "Don't," she cried, her voice breaking. Then, in a smaller voice, Mom, I'm sorry." Those words broke something in me. "Sorry? Baby, you have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing." Her face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "He said it was God's will," she whispered, her voice so small I had to strain to hear it. "He said I was special, that if I told you, you'd go to hell, that God would punish you for doubting a priest, that no one would believe me, that I'd destroy our family." She broke down in sobs, her shoulders shaking violently. I tried to make it stop, Mom. I tried. The horror of what she was saying washed over me in waves. This hadn't been a one-time assault. This had been ongoing, systematic, premeditated, and he had used our faith, our deep, devoted Catholic faith, as a weapon to ensure her silence. "How long?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Since the beginning," she said between sobs. "The first day. 3 years. 3 years. 3 years this monster had been abusing my daughter, in my house, while I was at work. Every Thursday, for 3 years. And I had thanked him for it, praised his dedication, believed him when he said she was just going through a difficult phase when she asked to stop the lessons. I felt physically ill. The nausea that had sent me home from work returned tenfold. I barely made it to Rachel's bathroom before I vomited violently, my body's involuntary response to unbearable truth. When I returned, Rachel was still sitting in the same position, staring blankly at the wall. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, her face a mask of professional calm, though I could see the anger in her eyes. "We need to call the police," she said quietly but firmly. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. The dispatcher's voice seemed to come from very far away. "911, what's your emergency?" I need to report a rape," I managed to say. "My daughter, Father Michael O'Brien, St. Catherine's Catholic Church. He was in my house, in her bed." There was a slight pause. "Ma'am, did you say a priest?" "Yes." "Officers are on the way." While we waited, Mrs. Chen made tea that none of us drank. Rachel remained upstairs, unwilling to come down. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the knife that Mrs. Chen had placed back in the drawer, my mind replaying those terrible moments over and over. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. 2 patrol officers, followed shortly by a Detective Rodriguez, a stern-faced woman with compassionate eyes. They took in the scene, me still in my cafeteria uniform, trembling at the kitchen table. Rachel, who had finally come downstairs, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm June day. Mrs. Chen, standing protectively near us both. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" Detective Rodriguez asked, pulling out a notepad. I recounted the events in a flat, hollow voice. How I'd come home early with a migraine. How I'd heard sounds from upstairs. How I'd opened the door to find Father Michael O'Brien raping my 15-year-old daughter. How I'd grabbed a knife. How he'd fled. The detective wrote everything down, her expression never changing, though I noticed her grip on her pen tightened when I described what I'd seen in Rachel's room. "And where is Father O'Brien now?" she asked. "He drove away. Silver Honda. License plate." Somehow, in the midst of all the chaos and rage, I'd registered his license number. I recited it from memory. Detective Rodriguez nodded to one of the patrol officers, who stepped outside to radio it in. Then she turned to Rachel, her voice softening. "I know this is incredibly difficult, but I need to ask you some questions. Would that be okay?" Rachel nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes downcast. "Would you feel more comfortable speaking with a female officer alone?" Another tiny nod. Officer Martinez, a young woman with kind eyes, took Rachel into the living room while Detective Rodriguez continued interviewing me in the kitchen. Mrs. Chen stayed with me, her steady presence an anchor in the storm. Through the partially open door, I could hear Rachel's quiet voice responding to Officer Martinez's gentle questions. How it had started 3 years ago, how it happened every Thursday, how it began with inappropriate touching, then forced kissing, then escalated to full sexual assault. How Father Mike threatened her with divine punishment if she told anyone, that God would punish me, her mother, if she spoke up. My guilt grew with every word she spoke. How had I not seen this? How had I not protected her? Detective Rodriguez's radio crackled. "We've put out an APB on Father O'Brien," she informed me. "Silver Honda Accord, wanted for questioning regarding sexual assault of a minor." I noticed that one of the patrol officers, standing near the door, exchanged skeptical glances with his partner at the words "sexual assault" and Father O'Brien in the same sentence. He leaned over and whispered something I couldn't quite catch, but his expression spoke volumes. "You don't believe me?" I asked sharply, my grief momentarily giving way to indignation. "Mrs. Murphy," Detective Rodriguez said firmly, "we are going to investigate this thoroughly. I give you my word." 2 hours later, we received word that Father O'Brien had been arrested. They'd caught him on I-80 West, heading toward Ohio, still wearing his cassock, attempting to flee the state. The fact of his flight seemed to silence the skeptics on the police force. Innocent men don't run. Detective Rodriguez drove us to the hospital for Rachel to be examined. The rape kit examination was another trauma layered on top of an already unbearable day. Rachel, who had just endured the violation of being discovered in the midst of abuse, now had to submit to an invasive medical examination, answering clinical questions about acts too horrible to contemplate. I held her hand throughout, swallowing my own distress to be strong for her. The examining physician, Dr. Patel, was professional and compassionate, explaining each step before proceeding, asking for permission, giving Rachel as much control over the process as possible. When it was over, Dr. Patel took me aside. "The findings are consistent with sexual abuse over an extended period," she said quietly. "There's evidence of scarring from repeated trauma." I nodded numbly, the medical confirmation of what I already knew, another blow to my already shattered heart. We drove directly to the police station with the medical report. Here's your proof," I said, handing it to Detective Rodriguez. But Father O'Brien was already gone. The Diocese of Scranton had arrived with a high-priced lawyer and posted his bail, $50,000, paid in cash. The conditions of his release required him to surrender his passport and remain in Pennsylvania, but he was free. "He's gonna run," I protested. "You can't let him go." "We'll monitor him," Detective Rodriguez assured me, though she didn't look happy about the situation either. That night, Rachel and I went home to a house that no longer felt safe. Mrs. Chen insisted on staying with us, sleeping on our couch. Rachel had multiple panic attacks, her breathing rapid and shallow, her body shaking uncontrollably. "What if he comes back?" she kept asking. "I won't let anyone hurt you again," I promised, though I felt utterly helpless to protect her against the forces already aligning against us. By morning, news of Father Mike's arrest had spread throughout St. Catherine's and beyond. Our phone rang constantly, reporters, parishioners, even the diocesan office. I unplugged it. On Sunday, though I couldn't bear to attend Mass myself, Mrs. Chen went to St. Catherine's to see how the parish was responding. She returned with news that made my blood boil. Bishop Brennan had addressed the congregation from the pulpit, calling the accusations against Father O'Brien Satan's attack on our church, and urging parishioners to be wary of those who would destroy a man of God with false accusations. Half the church had applauded. "He called US satanic?" I said in disbelief. "He called my daughter a liar from the pulpit?" In that moment, my faith, the bedrock of my existence for all my 44 years, cracked irreparably. Not because I doubted God, but because I finally saw the institution I had trusted so completely for what it truly was, a system designed to protect itself, not the vulnerable in its care. The church had begun its counterattack, and we were about to learn just how powerful an enemy we had made. The week following Father O'Brien's arrest set the pattern for what would become our new reality. The Diocese of Scranton released an official statement, carefully crafted in the language of plausible deniability and institutional self-protection. "We take all allegations of misconduct seriously. Father Michael O'Brien has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Father O'Brien maintains his innocence, and we ask for prayers for all involved during this difficult time." Not a word of concern for Rachel. No acknowledgement of the trauma she'd endured. No apology for failing to protect a child in their care. Just the bureaucratic machinery of the church grinding into action. Its primary purpose, not truth or justice, but self-preservation. Behind the scenes, their strategy was even more calculating. We learned later that they had immediately hired a high-powered crisis management firm from Philadelphia. They engaged a team of lawyers specializing in defending the church against abuse allegations. They even sent a private investigator to dig into my background, looking for anything that could discredit me. "She's after money. She's mentally unstable. She's trying to sue the church." These were the narratives they began to quietly plant in the community, whispered from one parishioner to another after Mass, over coffee at the Knights of Columbus Hall during parish council meetings. About 2 weeks after Father O'Brien's arrest, I received a call from a man who identified himself as James Callahan, attorney for the Diocese of Scranton. "Mrs. Murphy," he said in a smooth, practiced voice, "I'm reaching out because the diocese would like to help in this difficult situation." "Help?" I repeated, instantly wary. "Yes, we'd like to offer full payment for therapy services for Rachel, and a settlement of $75,000 to help with your family's needs during this challenging time." I sat in stunned silence for a moment. "In exchange for what?" He cleared his throat. In exchange, we'd ask that you drop the criminal charges and sign a non-disclosure agreement about the matter. The audacity of it took my breath away. You're trying to buy my silence? While your priest walks free? We're trying to help your daughter heal, Mrs. Murphy. A trial would be traumatic for her. This way, she can get the help she needs without having to relive her experiences in court. While your priest faces no justice and is free to do this to other children? No deal. There was a pause. You'll regret this, he said, his tone no longer conciliatory. It wasn't explicitly a threat, but the implication was clear. He was right. I would face many regrets in the coming months, but refusing their hush money would never be one of them. The community's reaction split along predictable lines. Many parishioners at St. Catherine's, unable to reconcile the beloved priest they knew with the monstrous acts he was accused of, chose to believe I was lying, or at least exaggerating. The alternative, that they had entrusted their children to a predator, was too painful to contemplate. A whisper campaign started, led primarily by the church ladies, those pillars of parish life who organized bake sales and prayer groups and wielded social influence like a scalpel. That Murphy woman always wanted attention. She's trying to sue the church for money. Rachel probably seduced him. You know how girls are these days, dressing so provocatively. Rachel, who had returned to school despite my misgivings, faced cruel taunts from classmates who had heard their parents discussing the case. Father Mike Fucker was the most common, hissed at her in hallways between classes. The school administration seemed helpless or unwilling to stop it. Our house was vandalized repeatedly. Eggs thrown at the siding, our mailbox smashed, my car keyed in the grocery store parking lot. One morning, we woke to find the word liar spray-painted across our driveway in bright red letters. The police did nothing. Probably just kids, they said with a shrug. I suspected some of them were the children of the same parishioners who were calling us liars in church, but not everyone turned against us. Some mothers approached me privately, sharing concerns they'd had about Father Mike's behavior with their own daughters. My Emily had lessons with him too, one woman confided, glancing around nervously as if afraid of being overheard in the grocery store aisle. She never wanted to go alone. Now I understand why. These quiet conversations were the first indication that Rachel might not be Father O'Brien's only victim. As the investigation progressed, more would come forward. Finding legal representation proved surprisingly difficult. I called a dozen law firms, only to be told repeatedly that they couldn't take on the diocese. They have unlimited resources, one lawyer explained apologetically. They'll bury you in motions, drag it out for years. You'll lose your house before you ever see the inside of a courtroom. Finally, through a victims' advocacy group, I was referred to Sarah Goldstein, a Philadelphia attorney who specialized in clergy abuse cases, a sadly growing field in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The fact that she was Jewish and therefore not beholden to Catholic hierarchy or fearful of religious consequences was significant. "I'll take your case," she said, after listening to our story. "Pro bono if necessary. What happened to Rachel is part of a pattern I've been seeing for years. The church needs to be held accountable." Meanwhile, the criminal case was progressing, albeit slowly, and against institutional resistance. The district attorney was initially hesitant to prosecute. "Priest cases are hard to win," he explained to Detective Rodriguez. "Juries love priests. The defense will paint Rachel as troubled, attention-seeking. Are you sure you want to put her through that?" Detective Rodriguez, to her credit, was adamant. "We have evidence, medical reports, testimony. If we don't prosecute, we're sending the message that abuse is acceptable if the perpetrator wears a collar." The DA finally agreed, and criminal charges were filed. Multiple counts of sexual assault of a minor, statutory rape, and endangering the welfare of a child. During the discovery phase, our attorney uncovered something that confirmed my worst fears. Father O'Brien had a history. There had been previous accusations at 2 other parishes. In 1992, a family in Allentown had complained about inappropriate behavior with their daughter. The diocese had investigated internally, meaning they asked Father O'Brien if he'd done it. He said no, and they believed him. They transferred him to another parish. In 1994, another complaint emerged in Bethlehem. This time the diocese sent him to a prayer and penance retreat for 6 weeks, then transferred him again to St. Catherine's in 1996. It was the classic pattern that would later become infamous in the Boston Globe Spotlight investigation. Shuffle the problem priests from parish to parish, never involving law enforcement, never warning the new communities about the danger in their midst. As the investigation deepened, 6 other girls came forward with similar stories, all between ages 11 and 14 when the abuse started. All offered private catechism lessons, all groomed with the same religious language, all threatened with hell or divine punishment if they told anyone. None had reported before, silenced by the same toxic mixture of fear, shame, and religious manipulation that had kept Rachel quiet for 3 years. The case began attracting media attention. First local news, then regional, eventually even brief mentions on national outlets like CNN. Sarah Goldstein handled the press, shielding Rachel and me from interviews. The trauma was still too raw, the wounds too fresh to be exposed to public scrutiny. As the legal battle intensified, my personal faith crisis deepened. I stopped going to Mass completely. I couldn't bear to enter a church, couldn't look at a priest without seeing Father Mike on top of my daughter. I questioned everything I had believed for my entire life. How could God allow this? In His own church? By His own priest? The rosary beads that had been my constant companion remained untouched in my bedside drawer. The crucifix on my wall was turned to face the wall. I still believed in God. My faith was too deeply ingrained to vanish entirely. But my trust in the institution that had claimed to represent Him was shattered beyond repair. Rachel, meanwhile, was deteriorating rapidly. The depression that had been brewing for years deepened into something dangerous. She stopped eating almost entirely. The self-harm that had begun as occasional cutting became more frequent, more severe. She started talking about wanting to die. "I want it to stop, Mom," she whispered one night. "I just want it all to stop." In October 2000, just 4 months after I discovered the abuse, I found Rachel unconscious on her bedroom floor, an empty bottle of my prescription sleeping pills beside her. I called 911 in a panic, riding in the ambulance as paramedics worked to save my daughter's life. 3 weeks in a psychiatric hospital followed. The diagnosis: PTSD, major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. She started on medication, began intensive therapy. It helped, but the road to recovery would be long and winding, with setbacks and backsliding along the way. Through it all, I kept working my 2 jobs, fighting the legal battle, trying to support Rachel through her crisis, and enduring the community's ostracism. The financial strain was crushing. Medical bills piled up, legal consultations consumed what little savings I had, and the emotional toll made it increasingly difficult to function at work. One night, alone in my bedroom after Rachel had finally fallen asleep with the help of her medication, I broke down completely. "I can't do this anymore," I sobbed into my pillow, the weight of everything threatening to pull me under. "I just can't." Then my eyes fell on a photograph of Rachel on my nightstand, taken before all this began, when she was still a smiling, carefree child. And I knew. "Yes, I can," I whispered, straightening my shoulders. "For her. I can do anything for her." The battle was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and the church was about to discover that they had underestimated the strength of a mother fighting for her child. It wasn't until March 2002, nearly 2 years after Father O'Brien's arrest, that the trial was finally scheduled to begin. The delay wasn't unusual in complex criminal cases, but it was agonizing for us. Every motion, every continuance, every procedural tactic the defense employed felt like another barrier to justice, another wound reopened. During those 2 years, Rachel had stabilized somewhat. With medication, therapy, and time, she'd managed to complete her high school education, though her grades were far below what they would have been before the trauma. The panic attacks became less frequent, the nightmares less intense, though they never disappeared entirely. She was functioning, but the carefree girl she had once been was gone forever. Then, in January 2002, just 2 months before our trial was set to begin, something happened that changed the landscape entirely. The Boston Globe Spotlight team published its groundbreaking investigation into clergy sexual abuse in the Boston Archdiocese. Suddenly, what had felt like our isolated horror story was revealed to be part of a vast, systemic pattern. Hundreds of priests, thousands of victims, decades of cover-ups orchestrated at the highest levels of the Catholic Church. The story dominated national headlines for weeks, triggering investigations in dioceses across the country. In the wake of these revelations, public sentiment began to shift. Some of the parishioners who had branded us liars now approached with sheepish apologies. People who had once whispered about us in grocery store aisles now stopped to express support. Letters and cards arrived from strangers who had read about our case in the papers, sharing their own stories of abuse or simply offering encouragement. Trial preparation intensified. Rachel would have to testify, which terrified her. The thought of facing Father O'Brien across a courtroom, of describing the abuse in clinical detail before a jury of strangers, sent her into panic attacks so severe she sometimes couldn't breathe. Sarah Goldstein worked with her for hours, preparing her for what was to come. "They'll try to destroy your credibility," she warned. "They'll say you're lying, that you wanted attention, that you seduced him. Stay strong. Tell your truth." Jury selection proved particularly challenging in our small, predominantly Catholic community. Potential juror after potential juror was dismissed for bias. "I know Father Mike. He baptized my grandson. He's a good man. I don't believe priests do these kinds of things. It goes against everything they stand for." I think these accusations against the Church are part of a conspiracy. Eventually, after an exhaustive process, a jury was seated. 7 women, 5 men, ranging in age from 24 to 68. Not all Catholic. There were 2 Protestants, 1 Jewish man, and 1 woman who identified as agnostic. Sarah felt it was as balanced a group as we could hope for. On the first day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Supporters of our side filled the left side of the gallery, Rachel's therapist, victim advocates, the families of the other girls who had come forward. On the right sat Father O'Brien's supporters, Knights of Columbus members in their distinctive blazers, church ladies clutching rosary beads, parish council members with stony expressions. The tension was palpable. Father O'Brien sat at the defense table in a dark suit, not his clerical collar. A strategic decision by his attorneys to make the jury see him as a man, not a priest. He didn't look at Rachel or me when we entered. His face was a mask of pious solemnity, the very picture of a wrongly accused holy man. The prosecution's case was strong. Dr. Patel, the emergency room physician who had examined Rachel the day of Father O'Brien's arrest, testified about her findings, physical evidence consistent with long-term sexual abuse. The defense tried to suggest the injuries could have resulted from consensual sexual activity with a boyfriend, which prompted a withering response from the prosecutor. She was 15 at the time of this examination. There is no consensual sexual activity between a 15-year-old and an adult. That's the law. Rachel's testimony was the most difficult part of the trial. For her, for me, for everyone in that courtroom with a conscience. She took the stand visibly shaking, her voice barely audible at first as she told her story. How the abuse began when she was just 12. How it progressed from inappropriate touching to forced kissing to full sexual assault. How Father Mike used religious manipulation to ensure her silence. He said if I told anyone, God would send my mother to hell, she testified, her voice stronger now, anger beginning to outweigh fear. He said questioning a priest was a mortal sin. He said no one would believe me anyway because he was a man of God and I was just a troubled girl. The cross-examination was brutal, just as Sarah had warned. The defense attorney, a sharp-featured man with cold eyes, attacked from every angle. "Isn't it true that you had a crush on Father O'Brien?" he asked. "No," Rachel replied firmly. "Isn't it true that you initiated physical contact with him?" "No, I was 12. The horror in her voice was palpable. "If the abuse was so traumatic, why didn't you tell anyone for 3 years?" "He said God would send my mother to hell," Rachel repeated, tears now streaming down her face. "He was a priest. I believed him." She broke down completely then, sobbing so hard she couldn't continue. The judge called a recess, and Rachel was led from the courtroom, still crying. I wasn't allowed to go to her. As a witness myself, I had to remain sequestered until after my testimony. That separation was its own kind of torture. When I took the stand the next day, I recounted finding Father O'Brien in Rachel's room, grabbing the knife, his panicked flight. The defense tried to paint me as a neglectful mother. "You were working 2 jobs, barely home. Weren't you neglectful of your daughter's needs?" "I was supporting my child after my husband died," I shot back, "making sure we had a roof over our heads and food on the table." "Did you actually witness penetration, Mrs. Murphy?" "I saw enough," I said coldly. "Isn't it possible that you misinterpreted what you saw? That Father O'Brien was comforting your daughter during an emotional moment?" "With his pants around his ankles?" I asked incredulously. "No, I know what rape looks like." 4 of the other 6 girls who had come forward also testified, each telling similar stories of grooming, manipulation, and abuse. The defense tried to suggest they were copycat accusations motivated by the possibility of financial settlements, but the details of their accounts were too consistent, too specific to be fabricated. Detective Rodriguez testified about the investigation, the evidence collected, and Father O'Brien's partial confession during interrogation. He had admitted to inappropriate contact with Rachel before lawyering up, though he claimed she had initiated it and he had succumbed to temptation. The most damaging testimony for the defense came from an unexpected source. Monsignor Williams, called as a hostile witness, was forced to admit under oath that complaints had been made about Father O'Brien at previous parishes, that he had been transferred rather than reported to police, that St. Catherine's parishioners had never been warned about his history. The defense case rested primarily on character witnesses, a parade of parishioners testifying to Father O'Brien's good works, his dedication to the community, his apparent holiness. But as the prosecution pointed out in cross-examination, none of these witnesses had ever been alone with him behind closed doors. None of them had seen who he truly was when the collar came off. Father O'Brien himself took the stand, maintaining his innocence in a voice trembling with what he clearly hoped would be perceived as righteous indignation. "I was counseling Rachel during a difficult period in her spiritual development," he claimed. Mrs. Murphy walked in, saw an innocent pastoral moment, and imagined evil where there was none. His cross-examination was devastating. The prosecutor methodically dismantled his story. "If you were engaged in innocent counseling, why did you run? Why were your pants down? Why did Rachel accurately describe details of your private quarters at the rectory that she would only know if she'd been there?" Caught in multiple lies, his credibility shattered, Father O'Brien finally fell silent, unable to answer. In closing arguments, Sarah Goldstein delivered a powerful summation for the prosecution. "This man used God as a weapon," she told the jury, her voice ringing through the hushed courtroom. "He used faith as a tool of abuse. He preyed on a vulnerable girl who had lost her father, whose mother was working 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. He used his collar as a shield, knowing the protection it would provide him. Rachel is not lying. The evidence is overwhelming. Find him guilty." The defense's closing was weak in comparison, vague appeals to reasonable doubt, suggestions that Rachel was troubled and imagining things, pleas not to destroy a good man's life based on uncorroborated accusations. Then came the hardest part: waiting. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Rachel and I sat in a small conference room outside the courtroom, hardly speaking. I prayed. Not the formal prayers of my Catholic upbringing, but desperate, direct appeals to a God I still believed in, even as my faith in his church lay in ruins. Rachel seemed to have disconnected entirely, her eyes vacant, her body present, but her mind far away. A dissociative state, her therapist had explained, was a trauma response, her mind's way of protecting itself from unbearable stress. Finally, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom, Rachel clutching my hand so tightly I lost feeling in my fingers. "We, the jury," the foreman read from the paper in his hand, "find the defendant, Michael O'Brien, guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, sobs, angry murmurs from Father O'Brien's supporters. I collapsed into my seat, relief washing over me in waves so intense I couldn't breathe. Rachel didn't react at all, still dissociated, still far away in her mind. Father O'Brien's face registered shock, as if he truly hadn't believed this outcome was possible, as if the protection he'd enjoyed his entire career would surely extend even here. 2 weeks later, at the sentencing hearing, the judge delivered a stinging rebuke before announcing his decision. "You betrayed a sacred trust," he told Father O'Brien, who stood with head bowed. "You used religion to manipulate a child. You destroyed innocence. You deserve no mercy." The sentence, 15 years in federal prison. No parole eligibility for 8 years. Required registration as a sex offender for life. Laicization proceedings, removal from the priesthood, would follow. As Father O'Brien was led away in handcuffs, some of his supporters wept openly. I didn't. I felt only a hollow sort of relief. It's over, I thought. But as I would soon discover, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The criminal trial was just one battle in what would become a much longer war. In the immediate aftermath of the trial, Father O'Brien was sent to Lewisburg Penitentiary, a federal prison in central Pennsylvania. The Diocese of Scranton released another carefully worded statement. "We respect the jury's decision in this difficult case. We continue to pray for all involved, including Father O'Brien and the Murphy family. We remain committed to the safety of all children in our parishes." Still no apology. Still no acknowledgement of their role in enabling abuse by shuffling a known predator from parish to parish. Still protecting the institution above all else. Rachel and I should have felt relief after the verdict. Justice had been served, at least in the criminal courts. But trauma doesn't end with the bang of a gavel. In many ways, the hard work was just beginning. Rachel was still struggling. The trial had forced her to relive the most horrific experiences of her life in excruciating detail, in public, under cross-examination. Her PTSD symptoms flared up again. Nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks that would leave her gasping for air, convinced she was dying. We adjusted her medications, increased her therapy sessions to twice weekly, took each day 1 hour at a time. Then came January 2002, when the Boston Globe Spotlight team published their explosive investigation into clergy sexual abuse in the Boston Archdiocese. The scale of what they uncovered was staggering. Hundreds of priests accused of molesting thousands of children over decades, with church leadership systematically covering up the abuse and protecting the perpetrators rather than the victims. Suddenly, our personal nightmare was cast in a new light. We weren't alone. This wasn't an isolated incident, a single bad priest, a unique horror. We were part of a pattern so vast, so systemic, that it defied comprehension. The Spotlight investigation opened floodgates across the country. Victims who had remained silent for years, even decades, began coming forward. Investigations launched in dioceses nationwide. The phone calls and letters poured in, from other survivors, from advocates, from journalists wanting to connect our case to the larger story. Initially, I refused all media requests. The wound was still too raw, the pain too fresh to expose to the public gaze. But Sarah Goldstein, our attorney, gently suggested we reconsider. "Your story matters, Diane," she said. "It's part of this larger pattern. It could help others come forward, help other parents recognize the warning signs. Eventually, I agreed to limited interviews with strict boundaries. No photographs of Rachel. No explicit details of the abuse. Focus on the systemic issues rather than the personal trauma. In 2003, Ed Bradley from 60 Minutes came to our home. The segment that aired was powerful, a devastating indictment not just of Father O'Brien, but of the entire system that had protected him and others like him. Rachel, then 18, chose to speak on camera, though in shadow, to protect her privacy. "I want other kids to know it's not their fault," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. "No matter what they told you, no matter how they used God or religion to silence you, it was never your fault. And you should tell someone. Keep telling until someone believes you." The response to the segment was overwhelming. 15 million viewers saw it. Hundreds of letters arrived at the network, many from survivors sharing similar experiences. The code of silence was breaking, piece by piece. Meanwhile, our civil lawsuit against both Father O'Brien and the Diocese of Scranton was proceeding. This was separate from the criminal case, not about punishing the perpetrator, but about holding the institution accountable for its negligence and cover-up. The discovery phase of the civil suit revealed even more damning evidence of the diocese's culpability. Internal memos showed they had been fully aware of O'Brien's history when they transferred him to St. Catherine's. Notes from a diocesan review board meeting explicitly acknowledged the risk, but concluded that with proper oversight, Father O'Brien can continue his ministry. That proper oversight had never materialized. No warnings were given to our parish, no restrictions placed on his access to children, no monitoring of any kind. They had gambled with our children's safety and lost, and then tried to avoid responsibility for their choices. By 2004, the diocese was eager to avoid a civil trial that would expose even more of their internal decision-making to public scrutiny. They offered a settlement, $2.5 million, plus a formal written apology. After consulting with Rachel, who by then was in community college studying psychology, we accepted. The money would ensure her continued therapy, fund her education, and provide some measure of future security after years of financial struggle. The apology came from the new bishop. Brennan had resigned in the wake of the Spotlight revelations and mounting evidence of his mishandling of abuse cases. His successor, more progressive and genuinely committed to reform, wrote, "We failed Rachel Murphy. We failed all victims of clergy abuse. We prioritized the institution over the children in our care. We are deeply sorry for the suffering this caused, and we commit to fundamental reform to ensure such failures never happen again." Too little, too late perhaps, but something. Rachel's recovery journey was long and non-linear. She completed high school, though barely, struggling with concentration and motivation. Community college came next. She started with just one class, then gradually increased her course load as she stabilized. She chose psychology as her major. "I want to help survivors," she explained when I asked about her choice. "I want to use what happened to me to help others heal." She transferred to Penn State in 2006, completed her bachelor's in psychology in 2008, then went on to earn a master's in counseling in 2010. By 2012, she was a licensed professional counselor, specializing in working with survivors of clergy abuse, turning her deepest wound into her greatest strength. My own journey took a different path. I left the Catholic Church entirely in 2001, unable to reconcile my faith with the institution that had so profoundly betrayed it. I couldn't look at a priest without seeing Father Mike, couldn't hear the words of Mass without hearing the lies he had used to manipulate my daughter, couldn't enter a church without feeling physically ill. In 2002, I tried attending the Episcopal Church in a neighboring town. It was similar enough to Catholicism in its liturgy and traditions to feel familiar, but with crucial differences. Women priests, more progressive attitudes, less hierarchical structure. There, I found a way to reconnect with my faith while keeping a safe distance from the institution that had harbored my daughter's abuser. I became active in victim advocacy work, speaking at conferences, training mandated reporters to recognize the signs of abuse, sharing our story to help others avoid our fate. The settlement money allowed me to reduce my workload to just one job, giving me time to focus on this new calling. Father O'Brien served 8 years of his 15-year sentence, released in 2010, for good behavior, a concept that seemed perversely inappropriate for a child predator. He was officially laicized, removed from the priesthood, in 2005, following Vatican proceedings that were typically closed to the public. Upon his release, he registered as a sex offender, as required by law, and moved into supervised housing where his contact with minors was strictly prohibited and monitored. The other victims who had come forward during our case had their own paths to healing. Some thrived, some continued to struggle with the aftermath of trauma. We formed an informal support group that met monthly, sometimes at my home, sometimes at a room the new parish priest, a good man, genuinely committed to healing, made available to us at St. Catherine's. I facilitated these meetings occasionally, though more often we simply shared our experiences and supported each other as peers. The diocese implemented reforms, at least on paper. Background checks became mandatory for all personnel who worked with children. A program called Protecting God's Children was instituted, training adults to recognize and report signs of abuse. A 2-adult rule was established. No adult would be allowed to be alone with a child. Any allegations of abuse would be reported immediately to law enforcement, not handled internally. How effective these reforms were in practice varied widely from parish to parish, diocese to diocese. Some embraced the changes wholeheartedly. Others made a show of compliance while changing little in substance. The Church, as an institution, moved glacially, resisting transparency and accountability at every turn. But the silence was broken. The code of protection that had shielded abusers for generations was fractured, if not completely demolished. That, in itself, was a victory. Incomplete, imperfect, but real. For Rachel and me, each day brought its own challenges and small triumphs. We had survived something terrible. We had fought a powerful institution and won, at least partially. We had rebuilt our lives from the ashes of trauma and betrayal. But the cost had been immense. The carefree childhood Rachel deserved had been stolen, replaced by years of suffering and struggle. The simple faith that had once comforted me through life's hardships was complicated now by knowledge of human corruption and institutional failure. We were healing, but the scars would remain forever. From 2012 to the present day, Rachel has built a remarkable career as both a healer and an advocate. Her private practice in Philadelphia specializes in trauma therapy, with a particular focus on survivors of clergy abuse. Her first-hand understanding of the unique spiritual and psychological damage inflicted by religious authority figures makes her exceptionally qualified to help others navigate their own healing journeys. There's something powerful about sitting across from someone who truly understands, Rachel explained when I asked why she chose this difficult specialization. When I tell my clients, I know what you're going through, they know I really do. It creates an instant foundation of trust. Her practice has expanded beyond in-person sessions to include telehealth appointments with clients across the country. Many seek her out specifically because of her personal experience, having seen her speak at conferences or in documentaries about clergy abuse. She also works closely with SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, both referring clients to their support groups and serving as a professional resource for their members. Rachel has become a respected voice in her field, publishing articles in psychology journals about trauma recovery, religious abuse, and the complex spiritual wounds suffered by those betrayed by religious authority figures. She gives training sessions to therapists, clergy, teachers, and other mandated reporters, helping them recognize the often subtle signs of abuse and grooming behaviors. Predators don't usually start with overt abuse, she tells these groups. They test boundaries gradually, building trust and dependency while isolating their victims from potential support systems. Recognizing these early warning signs is crucial to intervention before the worst happens. In her personal life, Rachel found love and healing in an unexpected place. In 2015, She met Jessica at an LGBTQ+ support group in Philadelphia. Rachel had come out as lesbian the year before, a self-discovery that prompted some ignorant speculation from people who should have known better. People would say, "The abuse made her gay," Rachel told me once, rolling her eyes at the absurdity. I'd tell them, "No, I was always gay. The abuse just made me afraid of men and disconnected from my own sexuality for years." Coming out was part of reclaiming myself, taking back what was stolen from me. Jessica, also a therapist specializing in trauma, understood Rachel in ways few others could. Their shared professional background and complementary personalities created a strong foundation. They married in 2017, after the Obergefell decision made same-sex marriage legal nationwide, in a small, joyful ceremony in a progressive Episcopal church. Rachel's choice of venue, a sign of her complex but healing relationship with faith. They live in a quiet suburb of Philadelphia, in a home filled with books, plants, and 2 rescue cats. They made a conscious decision not to have children, a choice Rachel explains with characteristic honesty. "My trauma is still too present," she says. "I have good days and bad days, the hypervigilance, the occasional flashbacks. They never completely go away. I wouldn't want to risk transferring that burden to a child. Instead, I help other people's children. That feels right to me." Our relationship has deepened over the years into something precious and strong. We speak daily, visit weekly. The trauma we endured together created a bond that, while forged in fire, has proven unbreakable. "Mom saved my life," Rachel said in a rare interview she gave for a documentary about clergy abuse survivors. Literally and figuratively. Many victims never get that moment of rescue, that validation of someone believing them instantly, acting to protect them without question. I was one of the lucky ones. I see it differently. "You saved yourself," I tell her. "You survived 3 years of horror before I even knew what was happening. Then you found the strength to heal, to build a life of purpose. You became who you are despite him, not because of him." Rachel's public profile as a survivor and advocate has grown over the years through her appearances in several landmark documentaries about clergy abuse. She was mentioned in Deliver Us from Evil, 2006, interviewed in Mea Maxima Culpa, 2012, consulted on The Keepers, 2017, and featured prominently in Procession, 2021. These films helped bring the clergy abuse crisis into broader public consciousness, contributing to long overdue reforms and accountability. As a speaker, Rachel is powerful, articulate, brave, unflinchingly honest, yet somehow still radiating compassion. She speaks at universities, progressive churches, therapy conferences, and victim advocacy gatherings. Her message never varies, though she tailors it to her audience. Abuse is never the victim's fault. Abusers use power, trust, and authority to manipulate their victims and ensure silence. Tell someone. Keep telling until someone believes you. Healing is possible, but not linear. Some days are good, some days are hard. That's okay. Now 39, Rachel has built a life that many would consider a triumph over adversity. She is thriving professionally, stable personally, making a tangible, positive difference in the world. But the aftermath of trauma is never completely erased. Certain triggers still affect her. The smell of a particular cologne Father O'Brien wore, the sound of church bells, Thursdays, the day the abuse always occurred. When these triggers arise, she uses the coping skills she's developed over years of therapy, the same skills she now teaches her clients. She remains in therapy herself, practicing the self-care she preaches. "Therapists need therapists," she often says, "especially those of us working with trauma. You can't pour from an empty cup." Our decision to share our story publicly now, in such comprehensive detail, came after a new abuse scandal broke in late 2023. A different diocese, but the same pattern. A priest with a history of complaints transferred from parish to parish, multiple victims over many years, institutional protection rather than accountability. Rachel saw the news report and called me immediately. "I can't stay silent," she said, her voice tight with emotion. Not when it's still happening, not when children are still being hurt. Let's tell our story, she continued. The full story. Help people understand how it happens, why it continues, what it does to survivors and families. Maybe it will help another parent recognize the warning signs. Maybe it will help another victim find the courage to speak up. I agreed without hesitation. After all these years, the pain of telling our story is outweighed by the potential good it might do. Rachel today is not defined by what happened to her, though it undeniably shaped her. She is defined by what she chose to do with that experience, how she transformed her suffering into purpose, her trauma into healing for others. She still has nightmares sometimes, still has days when the weight of memory threatens to pull her under, still navigates the complex terrain of spirituality with careful steps, having found her way back to a relationship with God while maintaining a justified wariness of religious institutions. But she also laughs easily, loves deeply, finds joy in simple pleasures, gardening with Jessica, reading mystery novels, hiking in the Pennsylvania woods. She celebrates her clients' breakthroughs with genuine joy. She marks each anniversary of Father O'Brien's conviction not with bitterness, but with quiet acknowledgement of how far she has come. In professional circles, she is Dr. Rachel Murphy Chen, LPC, respected therapist and advocate. In her personal life, she is simply Rachel, beloved wife, daughter, friend. And in the community of survivors, she is something else, a beacon of hope, living proof that there is life after the worst kind of betrayal. The thing about trauma, she once told a group of survivors, is that it doesn't just break you down, it can also break you open. Open to deeper compassion, to authentic connection, to a more genuine way of being in the world. The goal isn't to pretend it never happened. The goal is to integrate it into your story in a way that honors your survival without letting it define your future. This is the Rachel I'm privileged to know now. Wise beyond her years, unflinchingly honest, deeply compassionate. The little girl who loved to sing along to the radio while I braided her hair, the teenager who suffered in silence for 3 long years, the young woman who fought her way back from the edge of suicide. All these Rachels are part of who she is today, and I couldn't be prouder of the woman she has become. Today, in 2024, I'm 68 years old. I retired from both my jobs in 2020, hanging up my cafeteria hairnet and putting away my cleaning supplies for good. The settlement money, carefully managed over the years, provided enough financial security to make that possible. I still live in the same house on Maple Street where it all happened. Some friends suggested I should move after the trial, start fresh somewhere new. Too many bad memories, they said. But I refused. I won't let him take my home from me too, I told them. This house holds painful memories, yes, but also good ones. Sean teaching Rachel to ride her bike in the driveway, birthday parties around the kitchen table, quiet evenings reading together on the couch. Those memories matter too. I wouldn't let Father O'Brien erase them. I remain active in my Episcopal church, having found a spiritual home that allows me to maintain my faith without the institutional baggage of Catholicism. My victim advocacy work continues as well. I speak at schools, churches, and community groups about recognizing the signs of abuse and the importance of believing children when they report it. People often ask about the knife, that 8-inch blade I grabbed from my kitchen drawer on that fateful June afternoon. The police kept it as evidence throughout the trial. After the conviction, it was returned to me along with Father O'Brien's jacket and briefcase that had been left behind in his hasty escape. I kept the knife. It sits in my kitchen drawer, still used occasionally for its intended purpose of cutting roasts. Some might find that strange or macabre, but for me, it's a reminder of the day I chose action over paralysis, protection over denial. I grabbed that knife, I tell groups when I speak. I didn't use it, but I would have. I feel no shame in that admission. A mother protecting her child will do whatever is necessary. People sometimes ask if I regret not stabbing him. It's a question that requires careful thought. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I answer honestly after a pause. I'm glad I didn't kill him, because then I'd be in prison, and I couldn't have helped Rachel from prison. But part of me wishes I had. That rage was real, and sometimes I still feel it. As for the Catholic Church as an institution, my feelings remain complicated. I can't forgive the institution, I say when asked. They knew. They protected him. They called my daughter a liar from the pulpit. That's unforgivable. But I don't hate all Catholics, I always add. There are many good people there, good priests who would never harm a child. It's the system that's broken. The secrecy, the self-protection, the institutional arrogance that places the Church's reputation above children's safety. The statistics speak for themselves. Since the 1950s, more than 6,000 priests have been credibly accused of sexual abuse in the United States alone. Over 17,000 victims have come forward, and experts believe the real number is far higher, as many survivors never report their abuse. The Catholic Church has paid over $4 billion in settlements to abuse victims in the U.S., yet financial compensation cannot undo the psychological and spiritual damage inflicted. When I speak to parent groups, I emphasize the warning signs we missed. An adult wanting to spend unusual amounts of time alone with a child, gift-giving and special attention that singles out a specific child's secretive behavior and insistence on privacy changes in a child's behavior, withdrawal, anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances. Sexualized knowledge inappropriate for the child's age, fear of specific people or places, physical signs such as difficulty walking or sitting, unexplained pain, or injuries. I also provide clear guidance on what to do if abuse is suspected. Believe the child. Children rarely lie about abuse, but they often minimize it. Don't interrogate. Let them tell their story in their own words. Report immediately to police, child protective services, or a school counselor. Document everything. Dates, times, exactly what the child said. Get a medical examination as soon as possible. Find a therapist who specializes in childhood trauma. To survivors, my message is unwavering. It was not your fault, no matter what they told you, no matter who they were, priest, coach, teacher, family member. Abuse is always the abuser's fault. You deserved protection. You deserve healing. To parents, I speak with equal clarity. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, investigate. Don't be blinded by authority. Priest, teacher, coach, it doesn't matter. Your child's safety comes first, always. And to the Church, my challenge remains consistent. Transparency now. Release all files, every priest accused, every cover-up documented. The only way forward is truth. Rebuild trust through accountability, not through damage control. As our interview concludes, Rachel joins us. At 39, she carries herself with quiet confidence. She sits beside me, and I put my arm around her shoulders, a gesture that would have been impossible in the early years after the abuse, when any physical contact triggered panic. I'm Rachel, she says, looking directly into the camera. I'm a survivor. I'm 39 years old. I'm a therapist. I'm married to an amazing woman. I have a good life, but I still have scars, and that's okay. Healing isn't forgetting. It's learning to carry it and using it to help others. I take a deep breath, ready to offer my own final thoughts. That day when I grabbed the knife, I say, I wasn't thinking. I was just a mother protecting her cub. That's all. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat, because my daughter is worth fighting for. Every child is worth fighting for. I look directly into the camera, hoping my words reach those who need them most. So if you're a parent listening and something feels wrong, don't hesitate. Grab the knife. I pause. Metaphorically speaking, fight for your child, because no one else will. Rachel leans into me, and I tighten my arm around her shoulders. Together, we offer a final message. We survived. We're still here, and we're telling the truth. For every kid who's still silent, for every parent who doesn't know, for every survivor who thinks they're alone. You're not alone. We see you. We believe you. As the camera fades, I reflect on our journey. 24 years ago, I walked up those stairs and opened that bedroom door, discovering a horror no mother should ever face. The path since then has been long and painful, marked by battles against powerful institutions, against community judgment, against the lasting effects of trauma. But sitting here with Rachel, my beautiful, resilient daughter, who transformed her suffering into healing for others, I know that we've won the most important battle. Not the court case, though that victory mattered. Not the settlement, though the accountability it represented was crucial. No, our greatest victory is this. Father Michael O'Brien did not destroy us. He wounded us deeply, left scars that will never fully fade. But he did not break us. We reclaimed our lives. We found purpose in our pain. We turned private tragedy into public advocacy. And most importantly, we helped ensure that other children would be protected, other parents would be vigilant, other survivors would know they aren't alone. That is a victory worth every tear, every sleepless night, every difficult day of the past 24 years.